All right. Good evening all, and thank you very much for joining us tonight for this BACCN webinar. And it's about preparing your visual presentation for our very exciting first ever virtual conference. I just want to say thank you very much for Colette Lawes-Chapman, who is one of our panelists, and Hayley Haggerty, who's the other panelist on here tonight. Thank to both of them. Thank you for putting this together. And there's some great tips on here with regards to how are we taking our conference virtual. And we're hoping that this will help you in putting your presentation together and taking some of that fear and anxiety away in presenting at the virtual conference in September. So we've got people all across the country joining us tonight, so welcome all. Look, hopefully we'll have a good discussion and help each other in preparing for this conference. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of etiquette with regards to our webinar and virtual presentation. So if you are on camera or something, just make sure that looking at your background, be mindful of what's in your background. Once we start the presentation, if we can just make sure that everybody switch their webcams off, and then we'll only have Colette, which is going to do the main presentation to begin with, and then Hayley. And then we'll open up the discussion board afterwards. If we also can, if I haven't muted you already, if you can just mute yourself while the presenters are speaking. And you can, of course, use the chat box to ask some questions in between if you have some questions while the presentation is going on. And hopefully you're happy that we are recording this. If you've got any issues with recording, one, turn your camera off, and two, or just let us know during in the chat box. And like I say, the chat box is there to ask questions. You can do it throughout the presentation. And then once the presentation is done, we'll unmute people if you're asking some questions. You should see on your, as a attendee, there should be an option to raise your hand, which will allow us to see that you want to ask a question. And then once we get to the questions bit, I'll respond to you for asking a question, and then we'll manage it like that. You can also use, like everything else we do for BACCN and all our webinars, you can use this as a reflection for CPD as part of your revalidation. So I am going to hand you over to Colette, who is my hero in terms of conference, putting things together for conference, and I'm standing in big shoes, taking over from her as conference director. So she's well versed in putting this presentation together and taking us through virtual presentation. So Colette, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Corinne. It's a real pleasure to be able to help co-present this session. BACCN is always about supporting its first-time speakers. We've always done this. This is our 35th conference, but our first time virtual. So it's ultimately really important that we attempt to support everybody as we always do. So we're all learning. That's my mantra at the moment, and we're all in it together. So everybody probably knows I've been on the national board for BACCN for 20 years. I'm currently the regional advisor for BACCN, one of 3 regional advisors. I'm also conference director for ASPE, which is Simulation Practice in Healthcare Association. And in my day job now, I'm deputy director of simulation at Guy's and St Thomas's. And I'm joined by Hayley. Don't know if you want to introduce yourself now, Hayley.
Yeah, thank you, Colette. Good evening, everyone. So my name's Hayley Haggerty. I'm a BACCN member, but with a background of critical care nursing, critical care outreach. But I'm currently in a teaching role as a clinical manager for the medical device company Teleflex. I first presented with BACCN in 2013, and I've since then had a number of opportunities and experiences to develop my skills in regards to presenting and teaching. and in the last few months drastically developed my skills for virtual teaching. And I'm really excited to be here today to be able to share some of those new skills, some of my experiences, and I really hope they're beneficial to you guys that will be participating in this really exciting Congress.
And thanks so much for joining me on this, Hayley. And I think these skills are for us going forward with any kind of live presentation, and we hope for our regions to also develop their own CPD resources for the members. So the principles of today are transferable, but largely we're focusing on the conference presentation. So I have not got anything to declare in terms of being funded, but I know Hayley has. So over to you, Hayley.
Thank you. So yeah, just to make it clear, I do work for a medical device company, currently Teleflex Medical, but this has been done in my own time and has no connotation to them. So just to be clear in that disclosure, thank you.
Thank you. It is important, everybody, if you have been sponsored or funded, to declare that when you're presenting for openness and transparency for everybody. So thanks, Hayley. So our aims for today are to understand the principles of presenting through the virtual conference that we're having in September 2020, and a couple of specific objectives to help people for reflection perhaps would be to think about how you will describe the steps for preparing to present, and for you to take away maybe 2 top tips that will help you deliver a professional presentation. So that's our specific aims and objectives. The conference is on the 14th and 15th of September, as you all know. So as a presenter, you will need to register for the conference if you haven't already. So do get in touch with BACCN support if you're having any problems with that. And do start tweeting about how excited you are to present at conference. So the virtual conference presentation types, there are 3. The first is our keynote speakers who are presenting live, as we are now doing a live online presentation. And if any of the keynote speakers are on here this evening, then we're happy to talk to them specifically in the Q&A session after this 15-minute session on anything specific. And then the second type is our oral papers. So those of you that have had an abstract accepted to deliver an oral presentation, that presentation will be pre-recorded in your own time at home, so in your own leisure. We'll explain more about that, but there will be an opportunity for live question and answer. And that live question and answer session you'll be given a slot for in the programme, and it will follow immediately after your pre-recorded presentation. And then if you are a poster presenter, which we always enjoy our posters, there is a poster presentation format, as always, and then there is an option for you to pre-record 5 minutes of a talk about your poster. You'll be able to have just 1 slide, so it'll be this static slide as an example, and you can talk for 5 minutes on it as a pre-recorded presentation. But that's optional because not everyone wants to do that. So all in all, the conference is going to be a 2-day event where it will be a usual keynote to start, and then some concurrent sessions for oral papers, maybe several, I think up to 4 strands. There might be a workshop in 1 strand, and the posters are going to be virtually held and accessible anytime for the duration of the conference. But and there will be an option for anyone to go into that virtual poster room and listen to the recordings or just review all the posters at any time in the conference. So in terms of general guidance, it's really important to know what you're aiming to present. So I always say 2 things. 1, what do you think your audience wants? So we know our BACCN audience traditionally is from the UK and often European delegates, occasionally some international delegates from the US or other countries. But they are critical care nurses. We do have allied health professionals and sometimes some medics in the audience. But think about, what does your audience want to get from your topic? And what would be the take-home messages that you want them to go back enthused about your presentation? So that helps you focus on what to prepare for. And then really important, you submitted an abstract probably a couple of months ago. Make sure your presentation aligns to the abstract, because your abstract is going to be published you know, on the conference programme. And if your content isn't the same, you need to be prepared to talk in your presentation briefly why it is no longer aligned to that. And sometimes that's because you can present an abstract, and with the time delay, you may well have some changes to your findings and it doesn't quite align, and that's okay, but just make it clear. Content development, so really important to think about. And I start by thinking, okay, what was the title of my abstract? So that's the title of my presentation, and what are my learning outcomes? So what are those take-home messages I want people to go away with, and what were the learning outcomes of my project? I find it really easy to then draft my content. I often start not on a Word document, I'll start writing into my PowerPoint slides. That's my top tip for you. Because if you write in a Word document, you then have very dense text to try and edit. So I think start straight away with your content. What is it that you want to put in terms of your the background to your project, maybe an introduction to where you work, and a little bit like we were, you start off with who you are, but then really the main findings of your and the main body of your presentation is linked to your abstract headings. So once you've got your background, your main findings, your recommendations and conclusions, it's important that you start thinking about the narrative. So the narrative is what I'm saying now. So be thinking about how you want to say things, how you want to present and prepare. And then we start adding images. And particularly for virtually online, we've often got quite clever at presentations these days when we're doing them face to face, but the recommendations for online is that your images are a clear image and they're static. So don't have GIFs, don't have little short clips and animations, because they don't come across very well on a virtual platform like this. So have images, and they're really important. The more you can have images instead of text, it's better. Definitely have graphs that present your data, pie charts, tables, nice and clear, giving them the title and clear legends of what your data is sharing. And then what I find, if I wanted to particularly highlight something now, I'd put on an animation, an arrow, or to flash up a particularly important message. That helps really hone on what's the important piece of information on that slide. And then once I've got a sort of draft that I'm fairly happy with, I'll find a professional friend or colleague and ask them, have they got the time? Could they read through this and give me some feedback? What do they think? And if they're a really good friend, I might practice presenting to them and say, what do you think? And can you give me some feedback? I'm really keen for your openness and your honesty. And I practice and I practice and I practice. I've always said this over the years of the BACCN. I'm usually in front of a mirror and I like to rehearse, even if it's the fire and housekeeping. I like to get it so my language is there and I'm ready. So we want to encourage you to practice your presentation because time is short. We will go through the timings a little bit later. So when presenting, oh, I apologise, Hayley, this is you.
No worries.
I am going to pause, have a sip of water and hand over to my colleague Hayley.
Thank you so much. So building on what Colette's introduced, the way I wanted to put forward how best to prepare for this, I wanted to start by giving some general guidance that I hope will be applicable if you present in person or virtually. And then following that, we'll look more specific in regards to the virtual presenting. So generally, any presentation for me, teaching as well, it's really important to consider self-care. And I wondered how best to put this forward, but I think the easiest way to say it is you want to be at your best to deliver your best. If you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're dehydrated, you know you're not necessarily going to be able to be the best you can be. And then you've got other elements to consider. So try and make sure you're well looked after before you do. And I will keep mentioning my first presentation at that BACCN Congress several years ago. But I was so nervous that if I hadn't eaten and drunk well, I can't imagine I'd have made it off that stage in one piece, because the pressure of the nerves for me were very intense. So please look after yourself before you go into this. Also, just make sure you know your material. Having confidence in what your content is will show as you start to present. If you're unsure about something, if you haven't practiced, that uncertainty will show, and that will add to your potential nerves. So make sure the practice, the writing, if this is something that you perhaps wrote several months ago, you may have to spend some time ensuring you really know that material before you do put it forward. Now, everyone is different in regards to cue cards or prompts or notes. I personally find any additional cue a bit of a distraction, and I like to focus on what I'm doing. But it's important for you to decide, if you're new to this, if you want something alongside. Now, that could be a printout of your presentation. That could be some cue cards with some bullet points. But find something that will make you feel comfortable in it, being able to fall back on if you do have a little bit of a moment where you're not quite sure what comes next. Now, that may be relevant live, but even when if you're doing a pre-recording, that might take a few attempts to get how you want it to, and having a few notes jotted around might be useful. Now, this is something that's really relevant for those who are new to presenting in any way, is being aware of your tone of voice, the volume you speak, and the speed of which you speak. It's very easy with nerves to start talking very quickly, potentially to speak in one tone, and that's not necessarily for your audience the easiest way to absorb information. So again, it comes back to practice, potentially watching those recordings back, or if your keynote being recorded and watching that back, it's fascinating to see how you come across, because it's never quite as you think it is. But just be very aware of the speed of which you speak, your tone and your volume. Timing. Now, for any of us in education, any of us presenting, timing is often a factor that can be a challenge, because I would love to talk all day long about things I'm passionate about, and my teaching can often overrun. And that's a good thing in the sense of it shows we have a lot to say and we're keen to share. But timing is so important from a professional standpoint to ensure that it enables the rest of the event to take place. So those of you pre-recording, you've got that benefit to record, check your timings and potentially redo. But presenting live, ensure you've practiced and timed. I did time this myself a little while ago to make sure I didn't go into too much detail, but just be confident with what you're going to use your timing for. Have some water to hand. Colette just mentioned it's very easy in the heat of the moment to get a little bit dry, a little bit. It gives you a moment to reflect, take a breath, catch your thoughts, and that's really important to have to hand. So just always ensure you've got something there to be able to take a sip if you need to. And this is the most important thing. Be confident in your content. If you're in a position that you've contributed or led on something that's allowing you to present to your critical care colleagues, be proud of that. Be proud you're in a position, and know that the people watching want you to do well and want to hear what you've got to say. And use that as a boost. If you can do this, this is an amazing achievement. It may be the first time, it may be the 100th time, but each time be proud and be confident. So moving on to some considerations specifically for virtual guidance. So a little bit of context here. I started a new role 1st of April that's supposed to be international, covering a number of countries throughout Europe, Middle East and Africa. And amazing timing, really. It was a couple of days after lockdown, and of course any educational initiative I have had to come to a stop. So very quickly I had to adapt to be able to provide something to my teams in those countries via a virtual platform. So this, and I've discussed with Colette as well, are a few key points that I've taken from specifically virtual presenting. And the first is to know the platform. So here we're using Zoom. I personally find this quite easy to use, but I've also used Skype, Microsoft Teams, and for those of you presenting at Congress, you will have support from BACCN of how to use the platform that you will be using for that. So just make sure you're familiar with it before you throw in. And check your tech. There is nothing worse when you're presenting in person if your presentation stops working or your projector doesn't work. And it's just the same virtually. If the audio doesn't work appropriately, if the camera's not quite right, It's not a nice feeling when you've got this amazing content prepared that you're then not able to deliver it because of a technical issue. For me, I've got a few little things that I now definitely do. So my delightful headset is one. I personally found my headphones with a wire very distracting. Without a headset, there's often an echo, so just bear that in mind. I've also had issues where my internet's been really weak via Wi-Fi. So I've had to plug in a cable, an Ethernet cable, because that's been needed to deliver a strong enough signal for me to be able to use this platform. So just make sure you've practiced, and if you're not sure, reach out for further support, because it can be really, really frustrating. We've already mentioned background at the start. Please just be aware of what there is. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely blank, but just be aware that it could be quite distracting to those watching you, trying to focus on you when there's something very interesting in the background. And just be aware that it can be seen and it may have an impact on your audience. Home distractions. I think many of us have had to develop these new skills to work from home, and suddenly children and pets and postmen and neighbours are a whole new world of distraction we haven't had before. Just be aware of what might become distracting. Personally, I've got 2 new kittens that are currently being kept downstairs by my husband to not interfere with this, but try and preempt what could creep up, what could put you off, and what could cause a distraction to your audience, and do your best to try and minimise those. Although we are all human, so if you can't, bear in mind that there is going to be an element of forgiveness there. Don't panic if there is a sudden distraction. The next point in regards to what to wear, I think it's really important to try and be as relatively professional as you would be were you presenting. More for me from a psychological perspective. I feel more prepared to present if I'm dressed in the way that I would be. But just make sure it's appropriate, make sure you feel comfortable, that's the main thing, and maybe avoid the pyjamas just for this one. Now, camera position. I think something that I've read recently, and because I've looked into this a fair bit now to try and develop my own skills further, and I'm still learning every day, is if possible, try and get your camera at a position where it's practically eye level. And when you're teaching or presenting, try and look at the camera. Try not to be distracted by your own face, because that can be quite off-putting, but that means you're more likely to have eye contact with your audience. So just consider, even if it's not exactly eye level, maybe just so it's not down, not really high up, just think about how you would want to present to a person or speak to another person, and try and place your camera, if possible, in a similar place. And this is something else I've had to really contend with. When I teach and present, I stand. And now I've had to adjust to doing everything sitting. And that can be quite uncomfortable, but I've learned to do it. But perhaps for your presentations, particularly pre-recorded, you can do it when you're standing. That might feel more comfortable, but do your best not to fidget. It's easier said than done, but be aware everything's visible. And even if you're not teaching, so this is another point I just wanted to finish this on. For example, just as Colette was speaking, I know my camera was still on. I'm aware that I can still be seen. It's not the time to go make a cup of tea, have a chat with my husband, or go see what the kittens are up to. Try and be an appropriate attendee, in that you're paying attention, you're not too distracting yourself, and do listen to your host's guidance about mute and your cameras. And having a host on such events is crucial for us as presenters. Listen to them for their input, but also make sure that you're considering your own behaviour. So what I've put forward there is a bit of a combination of general presenting techniques, but also those specifically to virtual. In a few months' time, you could ask me to do this, and I'd probably have a few more, but I really hope a few points there will be useful. So I'll hand back to you now, Colette.
Oh, thank you, Hayley. I was making notes just because I think, you know, each time we think about these things, we think about something new. So just moving on to the next slide, I might need you to do that for me now, Hayley.
Oh, apologies, I've taken over, haven't I?
That's okay. I can't get my mouse to work.
Oh, I've just relinquished control. You see, ongoing learning.
So it doesn't want to let me move my mouse. Do you want to take back control, or?
Yep, okay.
For some reason I can't. Oh, there we go. I can do it now.
You're back there.
it's intermittent. So this is what can happen, which is why we want to give you the confidence you pre-record, which is just the bit we want to talk about in a moment. There's my slide. Great. There we go. Okay, so back to just the conference itself. All those tips are very, very helpful for anyone. So the keynotes are presenting live. They will have the opportunity to have a pre-session with the technology lead for our conference, and there'll be a sound check, and we'll direct and organise that time with them. And we do that probably pre the conference, and also we will be doing that immediately before their session, just to settle in and make sure it all goes right. We ask the keynotes to join 15 to 20 minutes before the start time to allow for that, maybe making sure adjustments to the camera, just as Hayley's tips have said. And we encourage every speaker to read the virtual guidance, just to make sure they're familiar and they're set up ahead of time. So our oral presentations, that's some of you on the call or will be listening to this later. We're going to ask you to pre-record, and so your timing of your session is a maximum of 12 minutes to record your presentation. And we're going to ask you, and we'll be sending out a guideline if you haven't already received it, about how to PowerPoint record, which is very, very simple. And you can record over each slide. So if you do make an error, you don't have to do the whole recording. That's what's so amazing about PowerPoint. So we do look at the guidance that we send out to you, and if you've got any problems, you can get in touch with BACCM support. And so you'll send in a link to your presentation. It'll go as an MP4 presentation, probably being sent on WeTransfer, just because of size. And that will all be set up by our technicians, and you'll be given a time slot as you are normally at conference, and we'll ask you to join that about 10 or 15 minutes before the start time, because there'll be a sound check, because although your presentation is going to play for that 12 minutes, the chair of that session will then invite you for live questions. So you will have 5 minutes to answer questions. The reason it's 12 minutes instead of 15 as you would normally have is just to allow for any technical delays, and every speaker gets 12 minutes then in case we have any overruns or problems. And then our poster presentations are exactly the same through PowerPoint, but you'll have 5 minutes, and we're recommending, and we'll give you a slide deck to use, but there'll be a one slide, and that's really to help you. It's very, very difficult to talk in 5 minutes. So you're gonna have to really think about your content, what the key messages you want to speak to, because of course your audience will also be able to see your poster. And you'll be given a time for where there will be potentially a chat, and that session you'll be advised where and when that is. So generally rules are, as Karin started this session off, follow the guidance from whoever's facilitating your host. Really important, mute if you're not speaking, because you can't help but fidget, and that can distract from the learner's experience. Try and stay focused. When you're in a session, the orals, you'll be up to 4 in an hour's slot. We want you to listen to the previous people's talk, because of course they're going to be themed, and it's important to complement, or maybe you may be asked a question about someone else's presentation linked to yours if they're of a very similar topic. So it is important to be available and present for that hour, and stay on until you're asked to leave by the technician who will communicate with you. And that's really it. And what we want to suggest, particularly for CPD resources, but it's always thinking about, encourage people, a last slide could be a structured reflection knowledge check. So just pose a question for someone to say, you know, this is my presentation, you can look at this slide later, and this can help you think about something for your CPD portfolio. So in summary, really important to know your content. That's really helpful. Practice presenting, particularly before you record, and then practice recording just so you get familiar and try and get your timing right. Always remember what your take-home messages are, and probably start with the objectives being that, and also your take-home final message. And I really liked and echo what Hayley has said. Really enjoy the experience. You've worked hard on whatever you're presenting, whether it's a piece of research, whether it's quality improvement or a new innovation that you're sharing with us. Your experiences are so valuable and you should be proud of that. And we really look forward to seeing you on the 14th and 15th of September at the first ever virtual conference. I'm going to hand over to our host, Karen.
Thank you very much to both Catherine, both to Colette and Hayley. It's really some fantastic tips and things that I've been scribbling down as well to make sure that I hit all those points. And I'm going to again echo what they've both said. I am so excited about this conference. I think we're taking the lead in showing that you can do this virtual, and we've, as an organisation, we felt passionate about wanting to take we didn't want to lose our conference this year due to the pandemic, and we are innovating and learning together and taking our conference virtual.
And so, Karen, on behalf of all the BACCN, we want to thank you because you were the one that was brave and said we're going to do it right at the outset of the pandemic, when everyone else, we were all busy doing our bit for the pandemic, but you were brave and you fought through. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. It helped when I was off sick.
Yeah.
I had 4 weeks off, so it gave us some time. Anyway,
should I stop sharing?
No, we can leave it like that. That's fine. So we are open for questions, and I am going to allow you all to talk now. So we will be online for another 10 minutes or so, and you can either raise your hand on the alongside your name, and then I will call on you. And I've got a question from Anne. So Anne, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've been doing some training on, online teaching, because we've been doing a lot of online teaching, and they've suggested that people can do questions, or you can pose things on your slides and then get some, answers or questions in the chat, which I was thinking might be quite good as a starting point for questions at the end, but I didn't know whether the platform you're using will allow that sort of thing.
It's for the postage?
Well, for the presentation. So as you did a presentation, will people be able to put comments in the chat that they might want to discuss, or?
Yes, so throughout your presentation, there will be similar to what we're doing now, there would be the opportunity to post questions. And for each session, there will be a chairperson and somebody that managed the questions. It's very similar to what we're doing now.
Okay, lovely, thanks.
Any other questions from anybody else?
I can't see any.
It could be any question, essentially. And you should all be on mute to be able to ask questions. Or just send me a question in the chat box. I was gonna, yeah, Colette, you can go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think just to confirm, if we weren't clear in the presentation, so important, we will be sending a template for people's slides so that we have a corporate image. We've never done that before, but it's important on the virtual platform that it does have a corporate look to help everyone enjoy the conference. And I think that's, having been on a couple of events, I think that's really useful when there is a standard background template for everyone to use.
I think that's already on the website. So you could, if you haven't gotten it through an email to say as part of your acceptance to present, we've already uploaded onto the conference website. And Jane, our conference manager, has put together a little small video guide with regards to how to use the PowerPoint for your recording. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for people to present at conference for this year. And we've got a fantastic technical team that we've been working with for years now. They know exactly what we want and how we want to run our conference. And they've been amazing in setting up this virtual conference. So there will certainly be people on hand. We're also going to have a speaker's desk, similar to what we would have had normally if we were face to face. That will have one of the tech guys and one of the board members on that you could contact through either on email or phone on the day if you're having some major issues, and we'll try and help you get your issues sorted. So there's plenty of help on hand across the 2 days, and certainly in the lead up to conference. I'm more than happy for you to contact us and we can see if we can help you. If you're presenting an oral presentation, if you wanted to put a live poll on, we can facilitate, similar to what we do on Zoom. You can put a live poll on and get people to answer your poll during your presentation. The abilities are there, so it's just a matter of getting in touch with us and letting us know that that's what you want to do. Most probably give us your questions and things, and when do you want them to go live, and we can basically prepare that for when your session then comes online. Your chair knows that that's what's happening.
I think that's really important, Karen, just to cut in there. Have your poll questions ready, sent through to us, and then they can be put up. And then your chair is going to be a really good host for you, and to be welcoming and supporting for you. So it's good to know that you want to do that, because we can't dry rehearse it, unfortunately, but we can do as much prior to the conference, and even during the conference before your session. There'll be support just to make sure it's okay.
Yeah.
Whether it's worth sending that that information out on the email to people who are presenting, because I don't think that's in the email that's gone out, and that's really useful information to know that that's a possibility.
Is that with regards to the poll?
Yeah, regarding the poll, because again, anybody who's teaching virtually, they do encourage you to use polls to break it up a bit. So so having that option would be really useful.
Yeah, we could certainly get that out to the presenters, any of the oral presenters doing that.
I have one word of caution though. This is quite hard. This is like, at 4 strands running, we're going to have to keep to time. So I think it's so important to practice the timing of a poll and how long that takes, because there is literally that 17 minutes per person. So just it's my personal experience, is just be mindful of that. But it's great because we want a bit of variety and interaction as well. So just think about the time, because each current session really needs to stop to allow the delegates to then go into another concurrent session somewhere else. That's the same as normal, but it's harder virtually. We really do need to try and keep to time.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how we keep people. I'm going to have to be much stricter taskmaster than what we are normally, trying to keep those sessions on time.
Yeah, I suppose I was just thinking that it's harder to concentrate online, isn't it? Let's face it.
Yes.
You get distracted, and go get a cup of coffee or whatever it is. Yeah. So it's how it's things that keep people engaged so that they don't disappear halfway through or something. I think that's going to be a different challenge to what we normally have, because normally they're trapped there, aren't they, in the room?
You're absolutely right, Anne, and certainly that each chair will have a set of host guidance, and there's a few minutes to remind people of cameras, and that if you do need to go, you really need to get a drink to put your camera off and go, so that it's not distracting for everyone else watching, etc.
I can see it.
But yes, variety is good. It looks like your shift is about to start, Karen.
Yeah, I've got a question from my camera. Talk about sharing camera. I've got a question from Sheena. Do you want to?
Yeah. So obviously this is all very new to me as well, and I'm actually looking forward to being a part of it. But
Brilliant.
just with regards to pre-recorded presentation, is this a stupid question? How does it actually look on a screen? Is it half the screen slides and?
No.
But how does it work? Sorry.
It's a really great question. So I did a presentation for the European Society for Intensive Care Medicine a couple of weeks back now, and they only had audio because they asked for it as a live backup. We were going to do live as Hayley and I have spoken now, but they didn't have me visually. But actually what would happen if you imagine the screen you're looking at now, your recording will go to the bottom right. So it will be small, just to the bottom right of your camera. So you can rehearse that. So if you'd had a PowerPoint presentation open now, you could click on slideshow, and when you click on slideshow, there's a press record option, and then it lets you, and the guide will tell you this, it lets you either just do audio or audio and camera. So you'll see where you are. And it is interesting, and I'm really glad you raised it, because if there's a really important piece of information in that bottom right of the template, you might lose that. So we're going to absolutely make sure. I think the template is absolutely fine for it, but it's worth us checking. But I think you also check.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
And I can't help but keep talking to my camera. Hayley's reminded me, but I find I keep talking to my image rather than the camera. And it's because you want to have that engagement, but it is, it's a real challenge, and it's learning this new behaviour.
Yeah.
And then I'm attracted to looking because Hayley's come back up on my screen, so I'm going over again. Yeah. But actually, you do want to try and talk to the camera and pace yourself.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
No, thanks for asking that question.
Sheena, on the little clip that Jane had done, you can see what it will look like. She's basically done it recording herself during the session. So it's quite clear on that with what it looks like.
Right, thank you. I'm on annual leave this week, so I've not really interacted with much of my work stuff, but I'll definitely look at that.
Self-care starts with having some annual leave. Do not worry about it. And we're delighted that you joined us tonight, but don't worry about it and have a break.
That's great. Thank you.
So sorry, Karen, I've lost the chat screen. How are we doing? Are we thinking we should
wrap
up?
Right? Somebody had just asked, will the presentations be available to watch after today? We have colleagues who are presenting who may not be useful at this point to watch. Yes, they will be. We are recording this. So we will upload this presentation, including the Q&A, which is we're still recording. We will upload it onto the website, onto the conference website for anybody to access. So this will form part of all our resources that's online to try and facilitate making this the best experience for you as possible.
Yeah. Well, I think, Carmen, we ought to call it a day. I'm concerned of your shift about to start for your well-being as well. As co-facilitator of the session, or co-presenter, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me and thank Hayley for joining me and for the practice and the preparation time that she spent considerable time outside of her work time as a dedicated critical care nurse to BACCN. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me this evening. It's been a joy to be a part of, so thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's been lovely to see your faces and to share your expertise with us. So I am going to close this down and hopefully see you all in September, on the 14th and 15th September. And just to add, despite all the lockdown and isolation we are still going to have quite a big social program as well. So watch the space for that, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our ideas for our conference dinner and conference party.
No, I'm really looking forward to a virtual conference dinner, and of course the virtual regional quiz will be interesting as well.
It's going to be interesting. I think Ian has got some things up his sleeve for that. So yeah, thank you very much for everybody that joined us, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You stop recording.